This is Polish Peter, and you are listening to episode 83 of Immigrant Masters Unite. Are you going through a tough time right now? Does it feel like life is just kicking you in the teeth and then keeps knocking you down and over and over and over again? And you just keep have to getting up? Does it look like there is no end in sight here? Well, if this is where you're at right now, I would highly encourage you to listen to this episode. Hi, this is Polish Peter, and welcome to another amazing episode of Immigrant Masters Unite, where immigrants unite and transform lives. That's right. This podcast is all about helping you transform your life, your business, and the world around you. In today's episode, I have a guest who I met a little while ago from actually my own church. He's a pastor at that church. His name is Andrew Kim. His parents are from South Korea, and he was born in Canada. So in a way, he is an immigrant. He now lives in Michigan here. So didn't hear a lot of A's from him when he was speaking. So I think he lost this Canadian accent. But Andrew is a teaching pastor at my church called Kensington Church, right here in the Metro Detroit area. He's originally from Vancouver, Canada. And his work has taken him to Western Europe, Western Africa, all throughout the United States. And Andrew is passionate about communicating the message of Jesus and equipping Asian Americans to embrace their God-given identity. So he has a wife, Robin, and his 3 children. And he really speaks on this particular episode about what is it to have the grit, to have the resilience, to keep getting up. And how do you actually go about doing it? It doesn't matter if you're a Christian or not, whatever your religious background, that I will highly encourage you to listen to this particular episode, because the stuff that we shared on there is super powerful. How do you get through those tough times? How do you get to the other side? What do you do? And we share different books. We share the different examples and stories of people who have gone through that. Some of you might have read the books that are on there. Highly encourage, check it out, listen to this episode. I won't waste any more time. This is Pastor Andrew Kim from Michigan. So Andrew, thanks for being on the Immigrant Masters Unite podcast, man. I'm so excited to have you here.
Hey, thanks, Peter. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for the invite.
You're welcome, man. I am one of the things that you don't know about me is that, I've been going to your church. So this is a pastor directly from my church. And I've been going there for a year. And about a few weeks ago, I'm sitting there and I got this nudge. And I said, I should talk and see if I can have him on the podcast. So I'm really excited to have you here. So before we dive deeper into this, tell a little bit of your story of where you came from. I know your parents were from South Korea. So talk about a little bit of the story of growing up in that household and having those parents.
Yeah, it's my story, of course, is very much linked to my parents. And my parents, they both are college graduates. They both did very well in school. They were working in South Korea. And then they actually immigrated, came over to Canada so that my dad could go to grad school. And so they came to Canada in this town called Edmonton, and which is pretty up north. It's pretty cold. But that's where I was born. That's where my sister was born. And my dad, we didn't grow up. When he was doing his grad school, we didn't have a lot. And so my mom, I was a little kid. And so I didn't really know any different. But my mom, she sort of just did these odd jobs. And my dad, he went to school full time. And basically what happened with my family is that, of course, they experienced a lot of culture shock. They didn't have any family or friends here. Language, of course, was a big hurdle, especially for my mom. And so what happened with them was that, and we didn't have a whole lot because my dad was a full-time student. And so right when my dad was about to graduate with his PhD, he was offered an incredible job in another city in Canada, well paying from everything that my mom tells me. And then what happened to him was that he was diagnosed with stomach cancer, and then he passed away a year later. And so that's very much has had a huge impact on my life. And when I look at the immigrant experience, if I was my mom and I was in a foreign country with 2 young children, no family around, not knowing the culture, my college degree not being recognized, I would have probably taken my family and gone back to Korea. if I was my
Really?
mom. Because the fact is that my grandparents were very well off in Korea. And my mom, of course, not only had that support system, but she had other friends. She could probably gotten a job. In Canada, she really had nothing. And so, but my mom, the reason why she stayed was like most immigrants, she stayed because she wanted a better life, primarily for her kids. And that's what she wanted. And so she understood, and that even if she had to sacrifice everything, her hopes, her dreams, that at least if she stayed, that my sister and myself, like we could have a chance at having a quote unquote better life. And that's why she stayed. And she was a small business owner, and she basically opened up a flower store. We moved to Vancouver, and she opened up a flower store in downtown Vancouver. And for about 20 to 25 years, she worked every single day, never stopped, right?
Wow.
Because she was the only person there. It's like she's the epitome of a small business owner. There were no other employees. And so I remember days when she was deathly ill, she would still get out of bed, still get on that bus, and still go to work. And that's the work ethic that I saw in her. And that's one of the big things that has rubbed off on me, is that just working and working and working. And so I'm extremely grateful for my mom. But of course, there were huge challenges. My mom didn't know the language very well. And so for a lot of immigrants, it's their children, because their children know the language better, the system better, the culture better, that my mom relied a lot on myself and my sister to sort of navigate these different paths. And so there were definitely challenges. We had financial challenges. Yeah. Like I grew up in government assisted housing. We didn't live in the nicest part of Vancouver. But at the same time, my mom worked so hard, like so many immigrant families do. And so growing up, like, sure, we didn't have like a ton of stuff, but I never remember going to bed hungry. Like I always had clothes, always had a roof over my head. And so in that sense, I'm incredibly grateful for my mom, not only the sacrifices that she made, but also the fact that her hard work opened up a lot of doors for myself and my sister as well.
Yeah, that's incredible, man, because one of the things that I get a lot on this podcast is the resilience, right? That, you know, they have, and the never giving up. And what I'm hearing from you is what you've gotten from your mom about that is that resilience, that never giving up, right? Like, what are some of the top things that I think that you believe that you've gotten from your parents that resonated with you, that helped you in life?
Yeah, I think resilience is a beautiful word, because really, like she did have options. She could have gone back, but when she chose to be here, like that was it. Right. And so she was plan A, she was plan B, she was plan C. There was like nobody else. Right. And so unless she does it, it's just simply not going to get done. And so like there were so many times where she was just knocked down and knocked down and knocked down, where things just did not happen. And I remember one of the times was when she was first about to open up a store. Unfortunately, it went south and she lost a ton of money on that business deal. And I remember she was driving home, and she told me a story about this, because I think I was pretty young at the time, so I didn't even know what was going on. And she's driving home at the time, and she's crying and crying and crying and thinking, what in the world am I going to do? Right? Because I just lost all this money, right? I have nothing to do. And this was my plan of how I was going to support my family. And now she had nothing. And so, but at the same time, like what she had to do was she had to make a decision. Like I'm going to have to go back. Like I have to formulate a different plan, because there is nobody else. I have to help my kids. I have to support them. And so there's definitely that resiliency. There's that hard work. Something else that I know with a lot of immigrant families that I very much appreciate that has been passed down to me is a focus on education, and how important education is. And that education and just working hard in school, being committed to school, opens up a ton of doors. And I think especially with Asian families, that is something that, and not only Asian families, but so many immigrant families, that is something that parents very much focus on. And like, I was like a lot of Asian kids, right? I went to like school, but at the same time, I had all these other extracurricular things, right? I had like math classes that I would take. It would be like, and as a kid, I would be like, I don't want to do this stuff. Like my friends are just playing video games, right? I don't want to do this stuff. I don't want to take all these extracurricular things. But now looking back in life, and I would have to go to like Korean school on Saturdays when all my friends are watching cartoons and hanging out and playing sports. But looking back at that education, I am so incredibly grateful. And that's something that I try to pass on to my kids as well. Not only that resiliency and that work ethic, and really another word that I love is grit. right?
Yes.
And that's something that I feel like this generation is definitely lacking. And that even my generation, as like I'm 41, is my generation is lacking as well, that our parents definitely had as immigrants, and so many immigrants have. And so it's the grit, it's the resilience, but it's also really the focus, the appreciation, and the understanding of how important education is.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, because I mean, that's what my mom kind of was instilling to me, because she was a single mom for a very long time too, you know. In fact, I mean, for a while, we were in Poland and she came here to make some money, you know. And so I get that. So let's talk a little bit about that grit, that resiliency, because one of the things is I'm going through the church right now, at the Kensington Church here, local church. This series that you guys have going on is about what you do when you get knocked down, when the life hits you, when we get constantly knocked down. Like the movie that pops into my head is the Rocky, right? Rocky movie is like that famous scene when he talks to his son, right? It's not about how many times you get knocked down, it's how many times you get up. So,
exactly.
But if life keeps hitting you over and over and over again, how you keep going?
Yeah, that's so good, because that's exactly, honestly, what we're talking about this coming weekend.
There's going to be Rocky. Really, are you guys going to be talking about Rocky?
We're not going to talk about Rocky. And like, maybe I'll get it in there. I don't know, man. Maybe because of you, we'll be able to get it in there. But we're talking about boxing because we're framing it in the sense of like a boxing match, right? And something that I found out was the shortest ever boxing match in history. The shortest recorded ever boxing match in history actually happened back in 2007 in Minnesota, and it lasted for 1.5 seconds, right? Wow. It's crazy, right? Yeah. And that's how life feels like sometimes, in that it hits us hard, but then it's gone, right? It leaves a mark, it's painful, right? But at the same time, it's done. But then there are other times where it feels like the boxing match just never will end. And this is something else that I found out. The longest boxing match in history actually happened in 1893, and it went on for 7 hours and 19 minutes.
Are you kidding me?
No, I'm not kidding. You can Google it, right? And it lasted, you know how many rounds it lasted for? Get this, 110 rounds.
Wow. Crazy, so that's probably when they implemented that 12-round thing, I think.
Probably, because I'm like, how do you do that? And like, I was reading about this, and it was talking about the fact that like the final decision was it was a no contest, because these guys, after 7 hours and 19 minutes of getting punched in the face, they couldn't come out of their corners, right? They're too dizzy.
Oh, no kidding.
And the spectators fell asleep because it started on Friday night and it ended on Saturday morning. But the reality is, like what you're talking about, Peter, like sometimes that's how life feels, right? Yeah. It feels like we're in this 110 round fight where you're just constantly getting punched in the face over and over and over again. And you're asking, when is it ever going to end? Because life just feels relentless. And one of the things that we're actually talking about is we're actually going to be talking about a lot of different principles. And one of them is that when we're in these 110 round fights, like we need people around us, because you can't, like, as human beings, something that I believe is that we were never meant to do life by itself, right? And by ourselves. And it's easy when, like, you know what, life is going well, and you know what, like things are all working out, like business is great, family's good, like everything is fine and our health is good. That's easy. But when stuff, like when we keep on getting knocked down, when we find ourselves in the pit and the valleys of life, those are the times where we need to link arms with other people. And those other people are so important. Those other people who will encourage us, who will love us, help us when we're like falling, when we're face down on the ground, people who will pick us back up. It is so incredibly important. And that's one of the things that we're going to be talking about this weekend. But there are other principles as well. And one of the things is actually the Stockdale paradox. And you mentioned that you were talking about books, and a great book that I remember I read several years ago is a book called Good to Great by Jim Collins.
Oh,
it's like a bestseller, right? You read that book, right?
Yep.
And he talks about the Stockdale paradox and and Admiral Stockdale is one of the most decorated people in U.S. military history. He's an admiral in the U.S. Navy, retired, but he was he was taken prisoner in the Vietnam War, and he was tortured for, I believe it was 8 years. He was tortured. His life was threatened, all of this. And so how did he actually get out? And how did he actually survive? And he actually tells us, and Jim Collins actually interviewed him, and he said, it's not the people who are the optimists who survive. The people who thought, hey, you know what, I'm going to get out by Christmas, and then it wouldn't happen by Christmas. And they would say, oh, you know what, Easter, I'm going to get out by Easter, and then it wouldn't happen. And their hope basically faded, and they just sort of shriveled away and they died. But it was the people who thought, hey, you know what, I'm here for the long haul, and who really understood their reality and understood that, you know what, this is really, really hard, and confronted the brutal reality of where they were. But at the same time, they never lost focus of their end goal. And they said, I am going to get out. It doesn't matter. And so it's really combining both of these things. And so when we find ourselves in these terrible situations in life, it's understanding and recognizing, you know what, right now my life really sucks and it's really hard. And it's recognizing that. But at the same time, also never, ever losing focus of the fact that I am going to get out of this one way or another. Right. And I think that's the Stockdale paradox.
Yeah, I agree with you on that totally, because one of the things that when you are, in the middle of it, trying to resist it, trying to make it like, oh, it's not going to be, trying to push it away, right? It's not going to work. It's going to get worse and worse and worse and worse, right? So just being in it and accepting what it is for what it is, and then having that hope in the future is going to help you get through it. And I've been through it myself, many years ago. And it's one of those things that sometimes it's easier said than done until you actually go through it, right? The book that comes up for my, head when you were talking about is Viktor Frankl, From Man's Search for Meaning. I don't know if you heard that book before, but
yes, incredible book.
Another incredible story. And this is basically what he did too, to be in a concentration camp when he was in there.
Yeah, that's so it's basically like the idea is like living in reality, right? Rather than living in unreality or living in self-deception. And so it's just recognizing that. And there's so much power that actually comes. It's hard to do that because it's just easier to sort of have this sort of like this false hope and this unreality. It's easier. But when you actually confront that, there's almost like there's this freedom that comes from that. So yeah, it's just like, I love what your thoughts are as well.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, because living in reality, right? A lot of it has to do with your mindset, right? How you look at the situation, because living in reality can be both like, this is the worst thing, I can't do this anymore, I'm giving up, it's over. And then living in reality can also mean like, okay, this sucks and I'm going to get through it because ultimately this is my goal, right? So the reality, how much of that is a perception, I guess, of what that reality is, you think?
I think there's a lot of it is perception, right? And I think perception is powerful. Like how we see certain things is completely, it dictates the way that we live and the decisions that we make. And so two people can see things in a very, very different way. And that the way that we see will then determine, hey, this is the course of action that I'm going to take. And so I think perception is so incredibly important. But at the same time, sometimes, a lot of times, our perception is incorrect, right? And the way that you see a situation and the way that I see a situation will be very different. And that maybe it might not be wrong, but at the same time, in some cases it could be. And so one of the things that I really do feel like is really important to have is other people around us to help us to see and to really speak into our lives and to say, hey, you know what? Like you're not actually living in reality. This is not like right, the way that you're seeing things and ultimately the decisions that are coming out of it. And that's also another aspect of community that I think is so incredibly important. Yeah. People to speak into our lives and to really help us and to encourage us when we're going down that right road and that perception is correct. But at the same time, when it's not, to be able to say, hey, you know what? Like things need to change. And right. This is the way that you're seeing things is not necessarily correct.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And the other aspect of it, I think those people around you who are in that community, I think what is important, and I put this in my masterminds when I coach people, is coming from the place of love. I think that is so important when those people around you, when they're talking to you, right? You know, and they come from the place of love to be able to not only sometimes be straight with you, right? But at the same time, love on you, because otherwise you just come off and they're not going to be able to receive that.
Yeah. It's so hard though. Yeah. It's so hard though. Like, even if it's like the people who are the closest to you, whether it's family or like your closest friends, even though you know, like at least in your head that, yeah, they want the best for me and they're coming from that place of love, it's still hard to hear. Yeah. Especially like if you're so hard in like going down this one direction and somebody's like pushing against you. And so I feel like it's not only understanding and recognizing they're coming from that place, but at the same time also like we have to have a really a posture of humility in recognizing, hey, you know what? Like, I may not have it all together. I may not see everything, and really being able to hear and accept and embrace different perspectives as well.
Yeah. This just popped into my head. Based on the 2 points that you talked about, right? The reality and having the hope in the future. Do you think your mom knew that and then she was experiencing this whole hardships and everything? Do you think she looked at it this way?
You know what? I hope she did. I'm not sure if she did, honestly. I think the hope that she had, because she was somebody who followed Jesus, and she definitely had that hope. Because one of the things that she has told me over and over and over again in her life is that in her lowest moments, how God showed up for her in her life, and in just different ways. And other people might hear those stories and say, hey, you know what? That was just total coincidence that happened at that time, that person showed up, that this happened. But ultimately, through her lens and her perception, it was unmistakably God saying, hey, you know what? You're not alone in these moments, in these lowest moments in your life, that I am with you. And so I believe that she definitely had that hope that just as God had taken her out and brought her out of these terrible situations, that whatever she found herself in the future, that he would continue to give her everything that she needed, but also that when she was in that pit, that he would walk with her as well. But at the same time, she also had us. Like, her end goal was, I'm here because I want my kids to have a better life than I do. And so it was both of these things, I believe. But I don't know, like, in terms of her reality, it was really tough for her. And so I don't know whether she really had that, or whether it's just, sometimes I feel like difficult situations, if you're just in those situations constantly, they become normalized, right? And it's just sort of normal because that's your life.
I think what also is important is, and I want to ask you the follow-up question, like, what's your definition of hope? But I think what's important to know, what I'm hearing from what you're saying is, there was a powerful why that came with it. Like, for her, there was a powerful why that came with it. And if I'm looking at my life, or I'm looking at my kids, and I'm looking at my mom, what she had to do, there was a strong why that came with that hope. So talk a little bit about that. What's your definition of hope?
Yeah, I think that's so good. I think my definition of hope, just off the top of my head, is that ultimately that things in the end will turn out for the best. And that things will be, in some ways, like, things will be okay, right? Because like when that is stripped away from us as human beings, then ultimately, like, we have nothing, right? And like, you basically shrivel, like what you're talking about with Viktor Frankl. What I remember about his story is that I remember a story when he was marching. Maybe it was to a work site very, very early in the morning. And he tells a story about how everyone was really, really quiet because it was so cold and the situation was just brutal. And then what he had in his mind was that he was reminded of his wife. And he had no idea whether she was even still alive, whether she was where she was. But it was that hope of seeing her once again, of being reunited with her, of things being once again okay, that really propelled him to really be able to survive that concentration camp and all of those terrible situations that he was in. And so when that hope is stripped away, and I remember him saying in the book, when we do not have hope, we end up as people just shriveling up and die because we have nothing to live for anymore. Right. And so that's really how I see hope. And it's absolutely essential for every single human being. And when we are in the most difficult situations, so often that hope is what will carry us through and propel us through.
Yeah. I'm always amazed at the power of that hope, that why, right? Of what it can do for human beings, like how powerful we are. And like from a Christian perspective, right? Having Lord come alongside of you and help you with that is amazing. And it amazes me how people go through different difficulties, whether it's health, whether it's family, or whatever it might be, and they have this strong why, and how it can propel you to keep moving forward. It is amazing.
Yeah,
and I see
absolutely.
Couples like in their 80s and 90s, right, living, and they're still, I saw this one lady a few months ago who was, I think, 90 some years old, and she's running marathons. I'm like,
that's crazy.
That, right? I mean, but she's like, well, tell me I can't do it, right? It's not going to happen, right? And that, I think, that's what drives people more than anything, I think, in life.
Yeah, and absolutely. And that's like what you were talking about, like from like a faith-based perspective as a Jesus follower, that's the hope that ultimately that I have, is that no matter what happens on this earth, and obviously every single person who has lived on this earth for probably more than 60 seconds understands that it is broken, that it is so difficult, that there's so much pain and suffering and injustice in this world. But ultimately, as a Jesus follower, we're not only our responsibility is not only to engage in those and to try to bring about peace and beauty out of them, but at the same time, in the midst of that, what propels us and what allows us to continue to live with a joy and a peace, and not a false joy and not a false peace, but one that is rooted in reality, is that ultimately we know that in the end, that this is not it, that there is something even greater than this. And we have that in the back of our minds, and this life is just a blip, but ultimately, when the rest of eternity, when we will be in paradise with God, is so much greater. And so that's the hope that is so powerful as well.
That's awesome, man. I love it. Do you have a Bible verse that you live by? Curious.
Yeah, actually, it's crazy because like what you're talking about, I actually came across there's a lot of verses that have really been impactful for me in the past in just different seasons of my life. And when I was like in high school and I was going through an awful situation in my life where I was bullied and where I just thought about taking my own life, and I was just grappling with my dad's death in a different way. There was some words in the New Testament that were really powerful to me about God being present with us, even in our deepest and darkest moments. But at the same time, something that has really been powerful for me that I've been thinking about, especially during this pandemic where it's been so hard, and it ties well into this whole idea of hope, is also in the New Testament. And it's in this book that's called Romans, and it was written by a man named Paul. And this is what he says. He says, and it's a prayer really, and he says, "May the God of hope," right, "fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in him, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit." And I love that because he basically talks about the prayer is that may we as human beings, as followers of Jesus, be filled with hope. But the purpose of us being filled with hope isn't just so that we could live better, more comfortable lives, but it's for the purpose of so that we would then go out, and this hope would then overflow out to other people, and it would actually create more beauty in this world. And that's really the essence, I believe, of one of the foundational aspects of the Christian life, in that this transformation that happens in our lives, it's not just for us, but it's so that we would then share it with the people around us so that they could experience that as well. And so that's one of the verses that's really been powerful for me.
Yeah, I love that. One thing I heard in that verse as you were sharing is to give to others in some shape or form, like when you're going through a tough time. And I say this to my students sometimes. One student in particular right now, he's struggling financially, right? And one of my coaching conversations that we had, I said, listen, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go and give some money to someone else. And he's like, well, I don't have much. Well, I'm saying, whatever it is that you can, go and give to someone else. Because when you get out of your own head, right, it's going to help you to make an impact for somebody else. You're going to be able to, have a different perspective or whatever it might be. Because whatever you see, I mean, I know like you guys talk about in the church about having those missions in different countries. There's always going to someone out there who's got it much worse than you could ever imagine, you know? And when you go out there and help somebody else, it gets you out of your head. Like one phrase that I have for some of my students, depending who it is, once you're in your head, you're dead, right?
No, that's a good one.
Yeah, because you get yourself in there and you're just like, so get out of your head, go out there and do this. And that's going to help you become a lot more, impactful, a lot more, get you out of that slump in a way, kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it reminds me of something that I remember I was teaching recently. And it's this whole idea, like what you were talking about, when God gives us things, right? And like, you can call them different things, like say they're blessings, right? When God gives us blessings, it's not meant for us to just simply hold on to and just so that our lives will be better and more comfortable, but rather it's supposed to flow through us. And so it's not meant to stop with us, but we're just simply a stop on the way. And one of the phrases that I used is that in regards to the blessings of God, we're not meant to be containers, but rather we're meant to be conduits, right? And so if you actually think of it like water, like if you pour water into a container, it just stops there. And if it just stops there, what ultimately over time happens is it becomes stale, it becomes old, and it's not fresh anymore, right? But when you think about flowing water, and that's what happens in like sort of man-made lakes sometimes, or like lakes that don't just, they may have inflow but no outflow, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when there's like, you need water to consistently be moving for it to be fresh and renewed and all of that. And that's exactly, when you think about the blessings of God, that's a great picture of it, right? It just becomes stale when it just stays with us, but we're meant to impact the world around us, right? And so that's one of our philosophies in our church community as well.
Yeah, I love that, man. I love that analogy, by the way, about water. So one thing that pops up for me all the time is in the parable of talents, right? And for me, it's like God gave me the gifts. I need to keep working them, keep giving it to others. So let me ask you this. What gifts do you think you have?
Yeah, I was actually like thinking about this like the other day, right? And I guess there's like different ways. There's so many assessments out there, and your people probably know that, whether it's like Enneagram, Strength Finders, Myers-Briggs, there's all of these things. And there's just different things as well, like in terms of specific skills, what we have as well. And so I think like some of the things, I was just looking at my Strength Finders again, and one of my top two are achiever and learner. And so that's something that I love, and that's the way that I'm wired. Right. And like, I love to achieve. I'm like one of those people who just goes and goes and goes. And that's the way that I believe that God has wired me. I believe that's an ability that I have, in that I just love to get things done. And so that's like part of who I am. I'm like one of those list guys who will just go and go and go. And I believe that's a skill and ability that I have. But I also love to learn as well. And so I'm always asking why. I'm always like, I'm more of an auditory learner. And so rather than reading books, I'll listen to books. Like I have Audible, I'll listen to a ton of podcasts, yours included. And
I appreciate that.
I love that. And so I just love to like just pick up information and also gain different perspectives that really challenge my belief system and also enlarge my worldview and also my God view. And so those are two things that I believe, like that's the way that God's wired me. Those are two skills that he's given me.
Awesome. I love that. By the way, what I just heard as you were sharing earlier in the podcast, top things that your mom wanted you to do: learn, education, right? And resilience, the grit.
Yeah.
And see
hopefully
how those
I have
two,
that.
right? See how those two come
I have
up?
the grit. Yeah, I hope I have the grit. I don't know, man. And so sometimes I think, oh my goodness, I think I've lost it. It sort of like decreases as the generations go and we become more comfortable.
I got you, man. Listen, one more question I have is, because I always sometimes ask these people on my podcast is, what keeps you going? What's the why? What's your drive? What's the reason why you do what you do? Because you're a pastor at the church, right? I don't think that's an easy position to be able to have, to be able to influence people and stand up there and every single week and pour into others. But what's your why? What's your grit?
Yeah, I love that. And what my why is that it's obviously connected. It's connected to Jesus. I mean, I'm a pastor and I love what I do. But even if I didn't work in the church, my why would be the same. And so my why doesn't change based upon my vocation, my job, or my situation. Is always going to be there. So I might be a pastor right now, but who knows, maybe in 10 years, I might be out in the business world. Maybe I might be doing something else, but my why will still be the same. And basically my why is, like, I have experienced the transformational power of Jesus and his love in such a profound way. And at least for me, that is the greatest thing that I've ever experienced on this earth in my 41 years of life. More powerful than money, more powerful than fame, more powerful than family or any other relationship on this, any other human relationship on this earth. That is the most powerful and beautiful thing that I've experienced. And it has changed my life forever. And so that's not only for me, but I also want other people to experience that as well in their life. And so my whole why of my life is I want to communicate who Jesus is to the people around me. And trust me, on a lot of days, I do an awful job of doing that. And people see, rather than the beauty of Jesus, they see the brokenness of who I am. But hopefully there are days where my kids, my neighbors, the people around me, and the places that I've been strategically and intentionally placed, where people are able to interact with me and they're able to see the beauty of Jesus and they're attracted and they're ultimately pointed to him. And that's ultimately what I want. and for people to encounter Jesus and who he is and ultimately have their lives transformed the way that he's transformed mine.
I love that, man. And I will tell you this, man, seeing you on Sundays, I think you were doing a great job. I mean, it's your stories, the way you share, the way you put it out there, the way you put it together, it has an impact. You can see it when the people in the stands, I mean, when they're sitting in there. Mm-hmm. I think what you do and what you guys are doing in the church, that's what draws people because there is an impact. Like in the past Sunday that I was in there, I mean, it's amazing that gentleman that came up that he's supporting the veterans, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if there was a dry eye in that place.
Yeah.
You know, because of the impact that it's not just about us, it's about what we can do to others and help others. And that's what I love about this.
That's exactly why. Like that man, like Patrick Bell, who works with the veterans, is incredible, right? And his why is the same as mine, right? His life has been transformed by Jesus. So he wants other people to experience that same transformation. It's not something that I can do or any other human can do, but ultimately, like we point people to Jesus, and he's the only one who can bring about that change in people's lives.
I love that, man. Very cool. So listen, I want to make sure I respect your time and the time of listeners. So I want to go into my Polish Pillars final round here. So my first question is, what book would you recommend to the listeners?
Yeah, I would say I read a lot of books, and a lot of them are on like Asian American history and identity. And I'm engaged in one of those books. And a lot of them are related to my job as a pastor working in a church. But I think like for a book that has been on my mind this past week, and I really should reread it, is Good to Great by Jim Collins. And I think those principles that he has in those books, it's like a classic, right? And I know you've read it, Peter, and it's like you can't just like read it in one sitting. But it's just like you read a little bit of it, digest it. And these are not just business principles, but these are just life principles that when we embrace them, it will propel us forward. And it'll just allow us to experience more of like what God has for us.
Yep. I love that book, man. It's a great recommendation. It's actually been recommended before on the podcast too. So
there you go. Okay.
Book,
I wish I could have been a little bit more unique then.
But no, it's great, man. It just reinforces the power of that book. So how good it is. Okay. Next question. So we talked about the grit. We talked about resilience. We talked about, getting hit and getting up and all that kind of stuff. How would let's tie this up into a nice little bow. One last piece of advice to immigrant listeners who are going through a tough time right now.
Going through a tough time right now. I think one of the things, what I would say, that's a great question. People who are just going through a tough time right now. I think what I would say to people when you find yourself in just a really, really difficult time is I would say that in the midst, something that I've actually experienced and that really what gives me hope is that when we find ourselves in some of the most difficult times, I largely like how I view sometimes how I view situations. As I view them, I tend to compartmentalize, and that if a situation is really, really hard, I just look at it and just like, this is just terrible and whatever it is. And when life becomes better, then I'm like, oh my goodness, this is so beautiful. But one of the things that I found is that even in the most difficult periods in my life, there's not only just difficulty, but also it's mixed with beauty as well. And during those times when I'm in the pit and I'm in the valley, and I don't just simply focus on the hard and the crummy and the crappy, but I also look at, and I'm also open my eyes and also see the beauty around me. That is what really gives me hope and encouragement in those moments. And so for the people who are just going through just really, really hard times, one of the things that I would invite you to do even today is just take a moment and pause and just to look around you and to see and try to recognize the beauty that's present. And that beauty may come in the form of the people that you may have around you, the friends, your job, your family, whatever it is. But I guarantee you that if you look for it, there is beauty there as well. And I hope that that beauty is a source of hope and encouragement for you today.
I love that, man. I got shivers as you're just sharing this, man.
Thanks.
No, I can add to that. All right, next question. One thing you want to share about the old country, South Korea, maybe a food, custom, saying, place, anything.
Yeah, well, I love Korea. I love the food. Every time I've been there, I don't even know how many times. And as a kid, I would go and I love kimchi and all of that kind of stuff. And so, but I love Korean, like something that I have come to really embrace that is a little bit present in Western culture, but is definitely present in Korean culture and Asian culture, is just an honor and respect for elders. And that's something that I think is so incredibly beautiful, and that in Western culture, it's not as present. And as I get older, like, I just find there's so much wisdom. And like when I was a kid, I would do that just because I was forced to do that, just have honor and respect for my elders. But now as I get older, I'm like, man, these people have lived so much life, and they have so much insight and wisdom and so much that they can give to me. And so I love that about Korean culture, and just that respect and the taking care of the people who have come before you and just paved the way for you.
Awesome. And since you're raising your kids pretty well, man, you're probably all set for the, moving forward. And
I don't know about that, man. I don't think so.
I hear you, man. Awesome. Very cool. Next question. I believe that every single person in the world has a superpower. What's yours?
Superpower. That is a great question. What is my superpower? Something that I'm really, you're talking about something I'm really, really good at, huh?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Like, you put me on the spot. And what is my superpower? I would say one of the things that I am good at with connecting with people from all across just different life experiences, ages, ethnicities. I think one of the things that I'm really good at is finding common ground with people, because it doesn't matter like how old you are. It doesn't matter where you're from. It doesn't matter what your background is. There's something that we share as human beings. And I think I'm really good at just finding what is that common ground and being able to establish that connection between people. And so, yeah, that's what I would say. That's a great question. I love that question. Yeah, so great. Maybe if you asked me that and you were like, hey, give me a head, I probably would be able to give a better answer, but that's the first thing that I thought of.
There you go. You should do a sermon about superpower.
Oh, yeah, that is good. Because I actually do believe that as well. That we all are have been given abilities that from God, that we're able to do things really, really well. That's great.
Right. And then start picking people out of the audience. Say, hey, what's your superpower?
And put them on the spot. That would be awesome.
Get some interaction, right? Goodness. Put them on the spot.
Yeah, heck yeah.
All right, listen, Andrew, man, I love this podcast. I think it was an amazing podcast. What you shared on here was so impactful. I think somebody's going to, get a lot of benefits from this, especially when they're going through a tough time. If someone wants to reach out to you and find out more about you, or maybe speak with you, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. There are a ton of Andrew Kims, and it's almost like every Korean person, I feel like is named is every Korean person named Andrew Kim? But you can find me on Instagram, Andrew K. Kim. I'm on Facebook as well, or you can email me as well. And I have no problem, andrew.kim@kensingtonchurch.org, and you can just reach out there. And so I'd love to have a conversation, and if anyone is interested.
Awesome. It sounds to me like the South Korean community just want to keep it simple, right? When it comes to naming, just Andrew.
And then, Kim.
Yeah.
Kim is the Smith or the Jones of the Korean world. So
that's right. Awesome. Listen, thank you so much for sharing your life with us, your successes, and about your mom and all that kind of stuff. I think it's one of those conversations I hear very often about the parents growing up in the country here. And I think it's benefited you greatly. And I think you're passing it out to your kids, which is amazing. So I appreciate those of you guys who are listening on the podcast. I appreciate you. Without you, this podcast wouldn't be possible. I wouldn't be able to share those stories. So I love sharing those stories. I love that I get to do this every single day. So for those of you who are finding this podcast somewhere out on the internet, you can head over to mastersunite.com, or look us up in the podcast store on Apple and leave us a review. Share what you gotten out of this podcast in the review and let us know. And I would love to maybe even have you on a podcast in the near future. So thank you again, and I will see you guys on the next episode. So I hope you enjoyed this particular episode. I mean, there were several times in this episode where I got shivers as we were talking about the grit. Listen, I've went through some of my own grit times. As you may know, in 2011, I got divorced, and this was one of the toughest times for me in my life to go through that dark valley, to get through that, to get out of that. And looking back at this, there was a silver lining there. There was a reason why. That was part of the plan. So here's what I want to share with you. If you are going through this tough time right now for yourself, if you're going through a life where it keeps hitting you down, keeps knocking you down, how do I go about doing this? What's the hope, right? what is that reason why do I want to keep going? Here's what I want to offer you. I decided every Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern, I'm going to hold a free clarity session for anyone on this particular podcast who wants to take it. So if you would love for me to be able to help you figure out that why, figure out what that hope is for you, to be able to have you keep moving forward, go over to oneconversationaway.com. That's number one, conversationaway.com. Oneconversationaway.com. And fill out the short form on there so I get to know what you are about and all that kind of stuff. And one of the gifts that God has given me is the ability to pull out that strong, powerful why out of people. For those of you who know me, who are my students, know that I can do that. I want to offer that for you today. For free, gratis, no obligation, no catch. The only thing I'm going to do is have the powerful conversation with you and offer you my coaching. If that's a great fit for us, great. If not, we can go separate our separate ways. So oneconversationaway.com, no obligation. Head over there right now. Don't delay. Don't think about that. I'm going to do it later. In this moment, go over there and do that right now. And I hope that I can help you pull out your powerful why, your powerful grit way to get you out of where you're at today. All right? Until the next episode, this is Polish Peter, out.